Maximum number of reports in the maximum number of reports in 15th Lok Sabha till October 2011, followed by the Agriculture, Information Technology, and the Human Resource Development. Among the three financial committees, the Public Accounts Committee submitted 39 reports, whereas the Estimate Committee and the Public Undertaking Committee tabled 11 reports each. In terms of attendance of the members, uh, the Petroleum Committee registered 61%, Health Committee 52%, Finance Committee and Rural Development Committee 50% each, and Human Development Resource Committee 48%. And these were among the better attended committees. In Suhas Kashyap assessments, the concept of departmentally related standing select committees provide to Parliament sharper and more efficient, effective surveillance tool, restore the balance between the Parliament's legislative and deliberative functions and its role as a representative body, and above all, save valuable parliamentary time to the mutual advantage of both Parliament and the government. A number of MPs cutting across party lines in the Social Watch seminar in the New Delhi in November 2009 testified to general norms of consensus approaches in the committees. However, the experience of the Public Accounts Committee inquiring into the 2G telecom spectrum scam under the Congress led United Progress Alliance government in 2011-12 was extremely fractious. The Justice Ahmed Bengtchalian National Commission to review the working of Constitution in its report submitted in 2002 found some shortcomings in the working of the developmental parliamentary committees, such for example as their cumbersome size, absentees, lack of specialism, and focused work. The most important reform that they recommended was that besides the existing standing committees, three new nodal committees should be set up on each on national economy, subsuming the existing committees on estimates and the public undertakings, constitutional amendments and legislation, subsuming the existing committee on subordinate legislation. These are justified in terms of the fact that legislation in Parliament primary responsibility, executive powers of the Union, is coextensive with the legislative power, but the constituent power is exclusively parliamentary domain and major macroeconomic issues of fiscal, monetary, financial, industrial, and trade policies need to be considered in an integrated manner. With these committees in place, the Parliament would have an alternative perspective to consider instead of relying solely on the point of view of the executive. These recommendations have not been implemented at decline of parliament. The decline of parliament has been a recurrent lament all over the democratic world. In the case of so-called mother parliament in the United Kingdom, the argument appeared in the literature in the early 20th century. Soon after the heyday of the parliamentary government was suspended by the disenactment and the rise of the government. The growth of party system, cabinet government, presidentialization of the office of the prime minister, in American sense, enormous expansion of the functions and areas of government between and after the two world wars were the major factors responsible for the development. Even without the growth of a strong party system in West European sense in India, and the other foregoing factors in years after the Nehru Patel dumb right passed into history and the prompt growth of executive dominance under Nehru were the development of the new patrimonial prime ministerial cabinets under the Indira Gandhi and to a lesser extent under Rajiv Gandhi. There are, however, other indicators of the decline of the Indian Parliament, such, for example, as shortening session decrease of time spent in the scrutinizing legislative and budgetary bills, and the tendency on the part of the executive to bypass the parliament by legislating by ordinance. And there has been a sharp reduction in the number of sittings from the highs of 103 of the Lok Sabha and the 60 of the Rajya Sabha in 1952 to the lows of 74 for the Lok Sabha and the 74 to the Rajya Sabha in 2012. The data shows erratic ups and downs in the intervening years, but the general direction of the change is one of sharp decline. A similar decline in the time spent in discussing bills in the Lok Sabha is evident. The budgetary uh, preoccupation of the Lok Sabha from over 140 units of the time in early 1950s dipped to over 80 in the late 2000s. The frequency of the entire session being washed away. Opposition obstructionism has occasionally been witnessed until the 12th session of the 15th Lok Sabha. Since 2009, more than 50% of the 1.57 hours of the sitting of the House, 63 hours, was lost to interruption, with major national regional parties professing that this is a part of the parliamentary strategy where the government is absolutely insensitive to the opposition demands. Although the situation with regard to legislation by ordinance is not as bad at the national level as in some states where ordinance Raj mm, has incurred a good deal of structure by the Supreme Court, DC, Badhwa versus the state of Bihar. Yet the government of India has taken recourse to issuing ordinances where the parliament would have been feasibly used for the purpose under the given circumstances. Since the late 1980s, the decline of the parliament has further continued due to the unprecedented increase in the corruption and the criminalization of the political process. In 15th Lok Sabha elected in the 2009, 29.72% of the MPs had criminal cases pending against them in court. Among the two main national parties, the Indian National Congress and the Bharatiya Janata Party, and the percentage of the tented members stood 21.36% and 37.93% respectively. The relevant data for other parties were as follows: Communist Party of India (CPIM) 18.75%, बहुjan Samaj Party (BSP) 28.5%, Janata Dal United 40%, Biju Janata Dal (BJD) 28.57%, All India Anna Dravid Manendra Kajgam Kajgan AIADMK 44.44%, Dravid Munendra Kajgam DMK 22.22%, so on and so forth. Corruption and the criminalization of the politics have made parliamentary and legislative elections as affairs of the musclemen and the rich by and large. And the 15th Lok Sabha, 57.80% of the MPs are crorpatis, and the two main national parties and the percentage of such members is as high 70.87 in the INC and 50.86 in the BJP respectively. And several regional or nominally national parties, the percentages are also quite high or higher. AIA DMK 55.55, BSP 61.90, DMK 72.22, Nationalist Congress NCP 77.87, CPIM 18.75, JDU 40, Jammu and Kashmir National Conference 66.67, Rashtriya Janata Dal RJD 50 and BJD 42. The bribing of the Jharkhand Mukti Morcha (JJM) members to win a confidence vote in the Lok Sabha in the mid 1990s by the PV Narasimha Rao minority government brought out the chilly depths of the moral legal descendants to which the parliamentary morality and the illegality has descended. Instances of the bribes for raising questions in parliament, selling of ministerial and the parliamentary and discretion and utilities to the public and the economic and political scam has enormously multiplied since the 1990s among the dozens of the major scams indulged by the political and administrative classes. The two that are unsurpassed in the financial scale as well as the erosion of the legitimacy of the state relate to the allocation of telecom spectrum and the coal blocks to private companies by the Congress-led United Progress Alliance (UPA) government and its predecessors, the BJP-led National Democratic Alliance (NDA) government. Thanks to Comptroller and Auditor General's report to the Parliament and the Supreme Court's prompt action, they become public and prosecutable. The leakage of the taped conversation of Neera Radia, who was lobbying first for the Tatas and later for the Mukesh Ambani, have revealed how the corporate capitalist sector has begun to influence the news and the views of the supposedly free media, even the allocation of the ministerial portfolios in the federal coalition government headed by the national parties. Not unexpectedly, the incidence of extra parliamentary mass movements of the protest against caste and criminalization of politics and crime against women has become rampant and unending since the heady Arab Democratic Spring of 2011. The protests mounted by the Anna Hazare, Arvind Kejriwal, and the Swami Ramdev on the issue of corruption and black money are cases in point. So has been the spontaneous, leaderless, and the organizationless upsurge of the youth in wave after waves of protests against crime against women, especially the brutal gang rape in Delhi of the paramedic student and a moving bus in the winter of 2012, and the charges of water cannon, tear gas, and the batons by the police. The victim finally succumbed to her injuries in a Singapore hospital. The government was forced to appoint a judicial commission chaired by the former Supreme Court Judge J.S. Burma to recommend rape law reforms. A more stringent rape law has already been enacted by the Parliament. India, after a long full following the historical anti-authoritarian and the anti-corruption mass movement in the turbulent 1970s led by the Jai Prakash Narayan seems to be fast becoming a movement society besides being a lively electoral democracy, parliamentary versus judicial supremacy. Soon after the commencement of the constitution in 1950s, a conflict between the parliament and the Supreme Court developed over certain progressive socio-economic policies of the Congress government in India and the conservative Supreme Court that declared them unconstitutional on the ground of the fundamental right to property and occupation under Article 13 of the Constitution. Article 13 consider any law in the contravention of the fundamental rights upwards. The Nehru government moved to enact the First Amendment in 1951 to the Constitution, adding the ninth schedule to the Constitution to park such laws and make them void judicial review. It created a piquant situation whereby some laws were even higher than the constitution. The court, however, acquiesced to it as indicated by its judgment like Sankari Prasad Singh versus the Union of India 1952, Sajjan Singh versus the State of Rajasthan 1965. Ninth schedule was, after all, an amendment to the constitution itself. The explanatory note in Article 13 stipulated that law included legislation, ordinance, order, bylaw, regulation, custom, or uses having the forces of law. Article 13, Section 3, Clause A. However, in the Golaknath versus State of Punjab, 1967, the Supreme Court ruled for the first time that the Parliament's power to amend the Constitution stopped short of the part of the Constitution on the fundamental rights, as the makers had envisioned them in the image of the permanence. The court clarified that under the doctrine of the prospective, overruling the First Amendment 1951 and the Seventh Amendment 1964, that had abridged certain fundamental rights but continue to be valid on the basis of the earlier decision of the court. The Golaknath bench also contended that the explanatory note on the meaning of law and the Article 13 is illustrative rather than exhaustive. Amendments were presumably included with the extension of the term law. The court also contended that the heading of the Article 368 Amendment of the Constitution is followed by the explanatory subheading procedure for amendment of the Constitution. Parliament is therein only a part of the procedure of amendment and cannot thereby arrogate to itself the constituent power of the amendment. There is no necessity to imply any such powers, as Parliament has the plenary power to make any law, including the law to amend the Constitution, subject of the limitation laid down therein. Para 25 of the judgment. The Indira Gandhi Congress government reacted by enacting the 424th Constitutional Amendment 1971 to supersede the Golaknath judgment, as it had the result of making the Parliament to have no power to take away or curtail any of the fundamental rights, even if it become necessary to do so for giving effect to the directive principle of the state policy and for attainment of the objective set out in the preamble of the Constitution. Statement of the objects and regions of the 24th Amendments. This amendment altered the subheading of Article 368 to power of Parliament and to amend the Constitution and procedure thereof, and also added a new Section 3. Nothing in Article 13 shall apply to any amendment of this Constitution, including the provisions of the Part 3 that relates to fundamental rights. A new Section 4 reads, no amendment of this Constitution shall be called in question in any court of law. The government proceeded to enact the 25th Amendment 1971 to curtail the power of judicial review. This amendment gave total immunity to any legislation seeking to give effect to certain directive principle, Article 39, Section B and C, from judicial scrutiny, either on the grounds that they were inconsistent with the fundamental rights under the Article 14, 19 and 31, or on the ground that they did not give effect to directive principles. The Supreme Court's response came in its judgment in the case Vanand Bharati versus State of Kerala 1973. The court retreated and conceded that the Parliament had the power to amend any part of the Constitution, including fundamental rights, but it bounced back with the uh, ingenious argument that is doing so it cannot alter or destroy the basic structure or essential feature of the Constitution. The Constitution's power to amend does not amount to obliterate the existing Constitution or rewrite a new Constitution. The constituent power of the magnitude of repealing the Constitution or making a new Constitution belongs to only a new Constitutional Assembly. The judicial doctrine of unamendability of the basic structure of the Constitution has been criticized by some that it was propounded by procedural rather than substantive consensus among the Chief Justice and the consenting majority of the Keswanand bench, and the individual list of the essential features of the Constitution are not uniform in the judgment. The defenders say that the procedure by which The majority judgment was delivered was a valid one, and the lists are only illustrative and not meant to be, nor can they ever be definitive for all time to come. And some subsequent judgments, the Supreme Court has further illustratively added to the list of essential features. Minerva Mills versus Union of India 1980, S.R. Bomi versus Union of India 1994. The majority view of the case was on the bench that any law parked in the ninth schedule is open to judicial review on the touchstone of the basic structure doctrine has been consolidated by an unanimous judgment of the Supreme Court in IR Kolau versus the State of Tamil Nadu 2007. By implication, the First Amendment stands prospectively overruled, and any new amendment to the Constitution is open to judicial review on the criterion of the basic structure of the Constitution. In sum, the Constitution has vested the power to amend the Constitution in Parliament and state legislature as a ratifying authority in case of federally relevant structure of the government. But since case Vanand Bharti versus the state of Kerala 1973 case, the Supreme Court has become a decisive co-sharer in their sovereign power. The post 1970s literature on the Indian Constitution is unanimous about a paradigm shift in the institutional balance of the forces in the political system. The Rudolphs problem, problematized the evident struggle over stateness, judicial review versus parliamentary sovereignty. Granville Austin, writing about the struggle of the custody of the Constitution, opens despite occasional self inflicted bounds, and the court has been the bastion of the Constitution. Parliament enjoys the authority to amend the Constitution. The court has the authority to measure amendments against the basic structure doctrine. Pratap Bhanu Mehta considered the rise of judicial sovereignty and India's unlikely democracy, but adds there is a profound inner conflict at the heart of the Indian constitutionalism. The question, who is the Constitution's final arbiter, admits no easy answer. The court has declared itself to be ultimate judge and has been assumed the power to override duly enacted constitutional amendment. In India, the parliament and the judiciary have been and are likely to remain competitors when it comes to the interpreting the constitution. Mehta is obviously hinting at the change and the changeable institutional balance of force from the one party Congress dominance of the past to the present multi party coalition system, with the disordained bicameral and the disassociated national and state party system. There is, however, also outer conflict of the Indian constitutionalism, given the national ideological heritage of the Gandhian Satyagraha, the JP movement, and the current aspect of the public protests and the movements on the macro and the national scale, to say nothing to recurrent regional and local movements of the old variety around production and the distribution, and a new variety around the development, gender, ecology, the deeper political and the constitutional issue, and the implication of these new movements go beyond representative electoral democracy to the participatory direct democracy. This volume does not focus on all aspects of the political system, which seems to be caught in the prismatic mode, reflecting a variety of the colors, some suiting and some not very suiting, depending on the what aspect of the political system we review. And the terms of its performance, it can be both measuring 6% plus economic growth and somewhat disheartening distributive justice at the same time. We have lived through several eventful decades since independence and institutionalized peaceful transition of the government through an open ballot, and we have experienced a high degree of the governmental stability relative to many other developing countries, notwithstanding the fragmentation of our party system during the last 2 decades or so. Our political and administrative institutions have survived many crises of governance, big or small, though they are somewhat chipped by increasing corruption and the criminalization of the politics in more recent years. And yet, we are not willing to give up on these institutions, for they constitute the very alpha and the omega of our democratic system. Among the tall institutions, the parliament is the highest symbol of our democratic nation and the pride of our people. It is with this spirit that our contributors review its strength and the weakness and thus suggest reforms to make it better, representative, effective, and dignified institution. This volume is divided into seven parts. Three of our contributors focus on the dilemma of representation in the context of the minor politics and women in the part first. Part second focuses on the performance of the parliament, with each of the four contributors different take on the subject. The parliament and the judiciary as discussed by the three of our contributors in the part 3, focusing on the parliamentary privileges and the reservation debate. Three of our contributors in the part 4th emphasize on the decline of the parliament. In part 5, four contributors suggest some reforms to make the parliament more representative and accountable. Part 5th contains two papers contributed by research scholar at the PRS Legislative Research in New Delhi. And one of the papers in analytical theories on measuring effectiveness of the parliament while scrutiny, while the other is empirical and comparative, focusing on the parliamentary scrutiny of subordinate legislation. The last and the only papers in the part 7th analyzes recent parliamentary and the state election trends and evaluates as to likely outcome of the 16th general election 2014 in the terms of the new fragmentation of the polity. The opinions expressed in these papers are exclusively those of the authors. In presenting this volume, we are conscious that there may be some omissions or gaps and data overlaps in the papers, but this was simply impossible to avoid given the nature of our project. We do, however, hope that this volume will be interest and the value to readers from all scholarship disciplines.